1. The reveal. What it really is. Go ahead and get comfortable. Let your body sink a little deeper into wherever you're resting. Take a slow breath in and let it go. There's nothing you need to do right now. Nowhere you need to be. For the next little while, all you have to do is listen. Tonight, we're going to travel together, not with rushing or noise, but gently, like following a river downstream. We're going somewhere ancient, somewhere vast, somewhere that has stood quietly at the edge of the world for centuries, watching empires rise and fall, watching seasons turn, watching the dust of the northern plains drift softly in the wind. We're going to the Great Wall of China, or rather, what people have always called the Great Wall of China. Because here is the first thing worth knowing, the first gentle surprise of this journey. The Great Wall of China stretches 21,196 kilometers from east to west. 21,000 kilometers. Let that number settle for a moment. That's roughly half the circumference of the entire Earth. If you could somehow lay it in a straight line, it would stretch from London to well past the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And yet, it is not one continuous wall, not a single unbroken line of stone marching from sea to sea. No, in many places the wall simply stops. It reaches a river and the river becomes the boundary. It climbs to a mountain ridge and the sheer cliff face takes over from there. Gaps open where the terrain itself was considered defense enough, where the land dropped so sharply or rose so steeply that no army could hope to cross regardless. So the number, 21,000 kilometers, is not the measure of a solid rampart. It is the measure of something more like a vast living system, a boundary that breathed with the landscape rather than fought against it. It is the total sum of walls, paths, ridge lines, and natural edges that together made up the frontier. Imagine walking it slowly, the way the ground rises beneath your feet, the way the wind picks up as you gain elevation, the way the wall sometimes disappears beneath grass and time, and then reappears again, as if it never left. 21,000 kilometers of that. Which brings us to the second thing. The Great Wall is not one wall at all. It is a system. Over centuries and across many different dynasties, the Chinese built not just masonry ramparts, but a whole network of structures that work together. There were walls, yes, some of them grand and imposing, faced with stone and brick, but alongside those walls were trenches dug into the earth, moats filled with water, or left dry and deep, wooden palisades driven into the frozen northern soil. And then there were the beacon towers. These were perhaps the most elegant part of the whole system. Tall stone towers spaced along the ridgeline, each one close enough to the next that a fire lit on one could be seen from the other. When an enemy approached, soldiers would light a signal fire. The smoke and flame would be spotted by the next tower, which would light its own, and the next would light theirs. And in this way, a warning could travel hundreds of kilometers in just a few hours, faster than any horse, faster than any messenger. The whole thing worked together. The walls to slow and channel movement, the trenches to impede, the towers to watch and signal, and the natural barriers, the rivers, the gorges, the mountains, to do what stone and mortar alone could never do. It was a system designed not to stop the world, but to be aware of it, to slow it, to buy time. Now, there is a reason the wall winds the way it does across the northern landscape, a reason it follows certain ridges so precisely, clings to certain hilltops so deliberately. And it has everything to do with a very practical kind of wisdom. The builders of the wall, especially during the Ming dynasty, when much of what survives today was constructed, were deeply practical engineers. They knew that a wall built across flat ground is simply a wall, but a wall built along the crest of a ridge becomes something far more powerful. Suddenly you have defenders looking down from above. Suddenly your archers can see further, your soldiers can run along the rampart and survey the entire valley below. And so the route of the wall shifts and bends not randomly, but purposefully. It follows the ridgelines wherever they run in roughly the right direction. It finds the narrow mountain passes, the gaps between peaks where any traveler, any army, any caravan would naturally have to funnel through, and it places its gates there. If you want to cross, here is the gate, here is the checkpoint, here is where we know you. By using the terrain this way, the builders could accomplish more with less. A shorter wall on a ridgeline offered better protection than a longer wall on flat ground. The mountain did half the work, the wall simply completed it. There is something very peaceful about that idea actually, working with the land rather than against it, letting the landscape lead. The Chinese name for the Great Wall is Changcheng, and it translates simply and quietly as Long Wall. Not Great Wall, not Mighty Wall, not Eternal Wall or Impenetrable Wall, just Long Wall. There is something almost humble in that, as though the people who built it and lived beside it for generations saw it not as a monument to power or ambition, but simply as what it was, a very, very long wall. And yet the wall has always carried a deeper meaning too. In Chinese history and imagination, Changcheng has long stood as a symbol of the northern frontier, the edge of the known, the civilized world pressing up against the open steppe. For thousands of years, China's northern border was a place of tension, negotiation, trade, conflict, and cultural exchange between the settled, agricultural Chinese dynasties and the nomadic peoples of the grasslands beyond. The wall marked that boundary, not just in stone and mortar, but symbolically. It said, "Here is the inside. Here is where the rules apply. Here is where the rice grows, and the cities stand, and the emperors hold court. And out there, beyond the wall, the world is different. Changcheng, the Long Wall. The name is gentle and the idea it carries is immense. And now we come to what might be the most surprising thing of all about this wall that stretches across the top of the world, something that quietly undoes the picture most of us hold in our minds. When many people imagine the Great Wall, they picture those famous sections near Beijing. Tall, broad ramparts of grey stone and brick with crenellated battlements along the top and watchtowers rising at regular intervals. Solemn and imposing against the mountain sky. That image is real. Those sections exist. But they represent only a small part of the total wall. In many places, in large stretches of the older, more western sections, the wall is barely a wall at all. Sometimes it is a low ridge of packed earth, worn down by centuries of wind and rain, until it barely rises above the surrounding terrain. Sometimes it is just a shallow trench, a ditch running across the plateau, its edges softened by grass and time. In these sections there was no fine stonework, no carefully fitted bricks. The builders simply used what was there. They dug the earth up and piled it into a mound, sometimes stabilizing it with reeds or branches, sometimes mixing in gravel or lime. And then they moved on to the next section. The wall in these places relied not on its own height, but on the terrain around it. A low ridge on a steep hillside is still a meaningful obstacle. A shallow trench in a narrow valley still slows movement, still marks the line. The terrain was always the point. The wall was simply the finishing touch. So, if you were to walk the full length of Changcheng, all 21,000 kilometers of it, you would pass through all of these different expressions of the same idea. Grand stone ramparts and crumbling earthen mounds and dry trenches and river crossings and bare mountain ridges where the wall simply becomes the sky. Let those images drift through your mind, gently now. The stone wall curving along a mountain ridge in the grey dawn light. The earthen mound half buried in the tall grass of the western steppe. The ancient beacon tower standing alone on a hilltop, its signal fires long cold, its stones slowly returning to the earth. The narrow pass where the gate once stood, where travellers and merchants and soldiers once came and went. All of it part of the same thing, all of it part of the long wall. There is no need to hold on to any of it too tightly. Just let these images pass like clouds. The ancient wall stretching quietly across the landscape of your mind. The wind moving over it, time moving over it, everything very still and very far away and very old. Rest now. There is more to discover, more quiet facts, more slow details, but they can wait. They will be here when you're ready. For now, just breathe and let the long wall carry you gently toward sleep. Act 2. Origins and the long build. Settle in a little deeper now. Feel the weight of your body resting. Your shoulders, your arms, the back of your head. There's nothing to hold on to. Just let yourself be heavy and still and quiet. In Act 1, we saw what the Great Wall really is. Not one solid line, but a vast, breathing system of walls and towers and trenches and natural barriers stretching across ridges and valleys for more than 21,000 kilometers. We saw how it bent to follow the land, how it rose where the terrain demanded it, and softened where the earth itself was defense enough. Now we're going to go back, further back, all the way to the beginning, because the Great Wall did not begin as the Great Wall. It began as something much smaller, much more human, a collection of separate ideas built by separate people who had no notion they were laying the first threads of something the world would one day call one of its greatest wonders. Long before there was a unified China, the land that would become China was a patchwork of competing kingdoms. Historians call this the Warring States period, a stretch of several centuries during which powerful rival states rose, clashed, expanded, and schemed against one another in an almost perpetual state of conflict. Among these states were Zhao, Yan, Qin, Wei, and others, and each of them at various points began to build walls. Not to keep out distant nomadic horsemen from the north, not yet. Mostly to keep out each other. These early walls were defensive borders, political lines drawn in earth and stone. The state of Zhao built walls along its northern frontier. The state of Yan pushed its own walls east. The state of Qin, ambitious and disciplined in the far west, raised its own barriers along territories it had seized and wanted to hold. Think of these walls not as the predecessors to a grand unified vision, but as something far more ordinary. Neighbors building fences, powerful, fortified, militarized fences, but fences nonetheless, each kingdom protecting what was theirs, each one saying, "This far and no further." The idea of a wall as a boundary, as a statement of where one world ends and another begins, was already deeply ingrained in the landscape of ancient northern China, long before anyone dreamed of joining those walls together. The earliest of those walls were already going up in the 7th century BC, roughly 2,500 years ago. Let that sink in gently. While the ancient Greeks were composing epic poetry and the city of Rome was still just a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber, people in northern China were already digging ditches, piling earth, and driving wooden stakes into the frozen ground to mark the boundaries of their world. For centuries, these walls existed separately, built by different hands, serving different masters. Then came Qin Shi Huang. In 221 BC, the king of Qin achieved something that had seemed almost impossible. He conquered the other warring states one by one and unified them under a single rule. He became the first emperor of a unified China, and he gave himself a title to match, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He was a man of extraordinary ambition, and he moved quickly. He standardized the currency, the writing system, the measurements. He built roads, and then he turned his attention to the north, to the old, disconnected walls left behind by the kingdoms he had absorbed, and he gave the order to join them. Around 220 BC, his general Meng Tian led an army of soldiers, convicts, and conscripted laborers northward and began the enormous, brutal work of linking the existing walls into a single northern frontier. It was, by any measure, a feat of extraordinary human effort. And yet, those sections are largely gone now. What most of the world knows as the Great Wall, those tall, broad, stone and brick ramparts that appear on postcards and in photographs, those belong to a completely different era. They are Ming. The Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644, invested more in the wall than any ruler before or since. They rebuilt older sections, extended the line, and faced much of it in carefully fired brick and dressed stone. The famous sections near Beijing, the ones that sweep dramatically across mountain ridges in long curving lines, those are Ming construction. Nearly 1,000 years separate them from the first emperor's earthen frontier. But let's slow down for a moment and think about how you actually build something this long. Because the answer turns out to be elegantly simple, you use whatever is nearest to hand. China's northern frontier is not one landscape, it is many. In the west, there are vast desert basins, dry, windswept, with almost no stone available for miles in any direction. In the east, there are forested mountains with good stone close to the surface. Near cities and towns, there are kilns, facilities for firing clay into brick. The builders of the wall used all of it, wherever they were. In the deserts of the far west, they gathered reeds from the dry riverbeds, long, tough stalks, and layered them with gravel and compacted earth, tamping it all down in alternating courses, the way you might press layers of pastry. The result was a rammed earth wall that, in the dry desert air, could harden almost like concrete. In the mountains of the east, where stone was everywhere, they cut and shaped it and stacked it with a precision that has outlasted empires. Sections built this way still stand almost perfectly today. And near the cities, where kilns were already producing bricks for buildings and roads, they used fired brick, uniform, reliable, easy to transport and lay. The great Ming sections near Beijing are built largely this way, their grey bricks fitted with a care that still impresses engineers and architects who study them today. Each section of the wall, in other words, is a portrait of where it came from. Read the material, and you can read the land. Some of the oldest surviving sections of frontier construction are out in those western deserts, quiet, crumbling, half buried in sand. They are Han Dynasty remnants, built roughly 2,000 years ago, and they look nothing like the wall in the photographs. There are no grand ramparts here, no crenellated battlements, no watchtowers with sweeping views over mountain valleys. Instead, there are long, low ridges of compacted earth and gravel, threaded through with dried reeds. Some sections are barely knee-high now, worn down by 2 millennia of desert wind. In places, the reeds are still visible, still holding the structure together after all this time. Grey and dry and impossibly ancient, sticking out from the eroded surface like the bones of the wall itself. These were Han frontier lines, extensions of the protective boundary pushed further west as the Han dynasty expanded its territory and its influence along the early Silk Road. They served the same purpose as the Grand Ming walls in the east, to define the edge of the empire, to slow movement, to channel travelers through known points. But out here in the desert, there was nothing to build with except what the desert offered, and so they built with the desert, reeds and gravel and earth pressed together and laid across the landscape in a line so long it vanishes into the haze of the horizon. There is something deeply humbling about those sections, actually. No stone, no brick, no grandeur, just ingenuity and labor and the quiet determination of people who needed a line to hold. One of the most quietly remarkable things about the wall is what lies beneath the parts you can see. When the Ming dynasty engineers set out to build their great stone and brick ramparts in the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, they did not always start from bare ground. In many places, they started from older walls, Qin walls, Han walls, walls from dynasties in between that had been sitting in the landscape for hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 years. Rather than clearing them away, the Ming builders often simply built on top of them. They used the old rammed earth core as a foundation, a base to anchor their new stone facing and brick coping. They repaired, they raised, they extended, which means that many sections of the wall are not just one wall, they are several walls stacked inside each other, layer upon layer of different centuries, different dynasties, different hands. If you could cut through a section of the Ming wall in the right place, you might find, beneath the fired brick exterior, a core of compacted earth that was already old when the Ming builders arrived. Beneath the Ming foundation, perhaps traces of an even older structure, history layered like sediment. There is something almost tender about that image, each generation finding what came before, deciding it was still worth building on, and adding their own layer to the story. The wall as a conversation between centuries. Of all the dynasties that invested in the wall, the Ming are the ones who pushed hardest, built longest, and left the most enduring mark. And there is a specific reason why, a particular combination of fear and geography that drove them. The Mongols. The Ming dynasty had come to power in 1368 by overthrowing the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, and the memory of Mongol dominance over China, a period that had lasted nearly a century, was fresh and unsettling. The Mongol tribes remained a powerful presence on the northern steppe, conducting regular raids into Chinese territory, and the early Ming emperors were acutely aware of the vulnerability of the northern frontier. Then came a decision that changed everything. In 1421, the Emperor Yongle moved the imperial capital from Nanjing in the south to Beijing, a city in the north, close to the frontier itself. Whether this was a gesture of confidence or a strategic error depends on how you look at it. But the practical effect was immediate. The capital was now just a short ride from the lands beyond the wall. The threat could not be abstract anymore. It was immediate. It was close. And so the wall building intensified. Over the following 2 centuries, the Ming poured enormous resources into the northern frontier: stone, brick, labor, engineering, garrison troops. They didn't just build walls, they built a system of interlocking forts, supply depots, and communication networks. They were, in a very real sense, building a military machine stretched across the top of an empire. And the wall we see in photographs today, those dramatic mountain ramparts near Beijing, is largely the product of that effort, built not in some distant mythological past, but in a period closer to our own time than to Qin Shi Huang's. And then, one day, the building stopped. In 1644, the Ming dynasty fell. A new dynasty, the Qing, came to power, and the Qing were Manchu, people from beyond the northeastern edge of the wall itself. The irony was not lost on history. The dynasty that had spent more than 2 centuries building and maintaining the northern frontier was replaced by rulers who had come from the other side of it. After 1644, no major military construction continued on the wall. The frontier that the wall had always defined, the line between China's settled heartland and the nomadic north, had been rendered politically meaningless. The Qing Empire eventually expanded well beyond the wall, incorporating Mongolia and other northern territories into a domain far larger than the Ming had ever controlled. The wall stood, but it was no longer a living military system. Garrisons were reduced, towers fell into disrepair, sections collapsed and were not rebuilt. Nature began its slow work of reclamation. But before it quieted entirely, there was one last moment of violence. At Gubeiku, a mountain pass northeast of Beijing, one of the most important and heavily fortified sections of the entire wall, there was fighting in the turbulent years of the mid-17th century. The battle left its mark. If you visit Gubeiku today, you can still see the evidence: small, dark scars in the stonework of the old towers, bullet holes. The last punctuation marks in a story of military construction that had begun 2,500 years earlier. Stand at Gubeiku and look at those holes in the stone. The wall is silent now. The wind moves through the towers, but the marks are still there, small, permanent, telling you that this was real. This was not just a symbol. This was a place where people stood and fought and held a line. Let that image fade softly now. The quiet tower at Gubeiku, the wind in the mountain pass, the ancient stone with its small scars. We have travelled a long distance tonight, from the first earthen mounds raised by rival kingdoms before China was China, all the way to the final battles of a dynasty in decline. 2,500 years of building, rebuilding, layering, extending, abandoning, and beginning again. All of it compressed into this one long, quiet thing that stretches across the top of the world. The long wall, Changcheng, patient and old and full of layers. Let your breath slow a little more now. Let the images drift. The desert reeds compacted into ancient ridges. The first emperor's soldiers pushing north into the cold. The Ming bricklayers laying their careful courses on a mountain ridge above Beijing. The last echoes of a battle fading into stone. Everything settling, everything still. The wall has been standing for a long time. It will still be there when you wake up. For now, just rest. Act 3. The human cost and the engineering. Let yourself arrive back here slowly. There's no rush. Feel where your body meets the surface beneath you, the weight of your arms, the rise and fall of your chest. If your mind has been somewhere else, that's completely fine. Just let it drift back, gently, the way a leaf finds its way back to the water after being caught by the wind. We've come a long way already on this journey. In the first act, we discovered what the Great Wall really is. Not a single line, but a vast system of walls and towers and natural barriers, 21,000 kilometers from end to end. In the second, we traced the long arc of its history, from the rival kingdoms building earthen fences against each other, all the way to the last battle at Gubeiku, the last bullet holes pressed into ancient stone. Now, in this third act, we're going to slow down even further. We're going to look closely at the people who built the wall, at their hands, their tools, their names, at the cost of what they made, because the wall is made of more than earth and stone and brick. It is made of human lives, and that is something worth sitting with quietly before sleep takes you. Think for a moment about the scale of what had to be built. Sections of the wall running across the tops of mountain ranges, towers perched on ridgelines so steep that the only way to reach them was on foot, carrying materials on your back. Walls climbing gradients so sharp that the staircases built into their faces are nearly vertical in places, more ladder than stairway. To build something like this, you need enormous numbers of people. And across the different dynasties and different centuries of construction, the workforce that built the Great Wall was drawn from every corner of Chinese society, and not always willingly. Soldiers were often the first to go. Military units were routinely assigned to construction work as a matter of course. Build the wall that will defend you, and defend the wall you built. It was practical, if brutal. Alongside them worked conscripted peasants, farmers pulled from their villages, sometimes for months or years at a time, separated from their families and their fields. The harvests they missed, the children they didn't watch grow, the seasons that passed while they hauled stone on a mountain. None of that appears in the official records, but it was real. Then there were prisoners, men convicted of crimes and sentenced to wall labor as punishment. For some, the sentence was effectively a death sentence, given the conditions. And woven through all of this were the skilled artisans, the engineers, the surveyors, the master masons who knew how to read a hillside and design a rampart that would hold against weather and warfare. Their knowledge was what made the rest of it possible. Without them, the soldiers and peasants and prisoners were just people carrying rocks. With them, they were building something that would last 2,000 years. All of these groups, soldiers, conscripts, prisoners, artisans, worked together across the centuries. Different dynasties drew on the workforce differently. The Qin were notoriously harsh, driving their workers without mercy. The Ming, building on a more sophisticated administrative system, were somewhat more organized, if not necessarily more humane. What united all of them was the work itself, the wall, demanding everything. And the wall took lives, a great many of them. Historians estimate that across all the dynasties and all the centuries of construction, something in the region of 1 million people died in the building of the Great Wall. 1 million. A number so large it becomes difficult to hold in the mind as anything other than an abstraction until you start to think about what it means in human terms. They died from exhaustion, from exposure to the brutal northern winters, working on mountain ridges where the wind could cut through clothing like a blade. From accidents, falling stones, collapsed scaffolding, the ordinary daily violence of building something enormous in dangerous places with primitive tools, from illness, from inadequate food. The conditions, particularly under the Qin, were so severe that the wall became a place of grief in the Chinese cultural imagination. There is an ancient story, a legend really, but one that contains a deep emotional truth, of a woman named Meng Jiangnu, whose husband was conscripted to build the Qin wall and died there. She traveled the entire length of the wall, searching for him, weeping as she went. And her grief was so profound that a section of the wall collapsed under the weight of it, revealing his bones. The legend has been told and retold for 2,000 years. It is not a story about the wall's grandeur. It is a story about what the wall cost the people who built it, and the people who loved them. And here is the detail that somehow makes all of it more haunting rather than less. Despite the million deaths, despite the suffering and the grief embedded in the wall's history, the bodies are not in the wall. This is a persistent folk belief, particularly in the West, that workers who died were buried within the wall itself, their bodies mixed into the structure as a kind of grim foundation. It is a powerful image, but it isn't true. Archaeologists have excavated extensively along the wall and found no human remains within the structure. The workers who died were buried elsewhere, in mass graves near the construction sites, or returned to their home regions when possible, or simply lost to history in ways that left no physical trace. The wall does not contain them, but in some sense that is almost more moving. Their bodies are somewhere else, unmarked and largely forgotten. Their labor is what remains, pressed into the stone, carried in the mortar, holding up the ramparts that have outlasted everything else about them. Now, let's turn to the wall itself, to the materials and the methods, to the quiet ingenuity of the people who figured out how to build it. We touched on this briefly in Act 2. Different regions called for different materials, but let's look more closely now at what the building actually involved. The oldest technique used from the very beginning and continuing for centuries was rammed earth, hangtu in Chinese. Workers would build a wooden frame around the intended wall, fill it with a layer of earth or gravel, or a mixture of both, and then pound it down, compacting it with heavy wooden mallets until it was as dense and hard as it could be made. Then another layer, then another, each one pounded into the one below. It is a slow, repetitive, physical process, but the result, particularly in dry climates, is remarkably durable. Some rammed earth sections have survived for 2,000 years in the western deserts, eroded but still standing, still traceable across the landscape. In the mountains, where stone was available, builders quarried it and shaped it and laid it in careful courses. The fitting of stone to stone required skill and knowledge, knowing how to read the fracture lines in rock, how to cut it to useful shapes, how to arrange it so the weight of the wall above was spread evenly rather than concentrated in ways that would cause collapse. And then there is the mortar, the most famous binding agent used in the construction of the Ming wall sections. The detail that tends to stop people in their tracks when they first encounter it is rice, glutinous rice specifically, rice that had been cooked down into a thick, sticky paste and mixed with slaked lime to create a mortar of unusual strength and flexibility. The chemistry behind it turns out to be surprisingly sophisticated. The amylopectin in the glutinous rice, one of the starch compounds that gives sticky rice its characteristic texture, interacts with the calcium carbonate in the lime in a way that makes the resulting mortar both stronger and more resistant to water than lime alone would be. It can flex slightly under pressure rather than cracking. It adheres tenaciously to both stone and brick. Modern structural analyses of Ming wall sections have found that the mortar binding them is, in some cases, harder than the bricks it holds together. The rice lime mortar has lasted more than 5 centuries and in many places is still doing its job perfectly. It is one of the great quiet achievements of pre-industrial materials science. Someone figured that out. Someone noticed, perhaps by accident, that adding cooked glutinous rice to lime mortar made something extraordinary. And then that knowledge passed from mason to mason, generation to generation, and ended up holding the Great Wall together. And the bricks themselves, those grey, carefully fired bricks that make up the facing of the Ming sections, carry one more quiet, remarkable detail. Many of them have names on them, stamped into the clay before firing or scratched in afterward, the name of the kiln that made the brick. Sometimes the name of the official responsible for that section of the wall, sometimes a date. In some cases, even the name of the individual worker. This was a system of accountability, a way of ensuring quality control across an enormous construction project. If a section of wall collapsed, inspectors could trace the bricks back to their source. The kiln master would be held responsible. The official would answer for it. It is, in essence, a quality stamp, a guarantee pressed into clay and fired at high heat. And it means that today, when archaeologists and historians examine these bricks, they are reading a kind of archive, a record of who made what, and when, and where. Hold that image gently in your mind. A grey brick, cool to the touch, 500 years old, with a name pressed into its face. Someone's name. Someone who woke up one morning in the 15th or 16th century, went to work at a kiln somewhere in northern China, and pressed their mark into wet clay, not knowing, not being able to know, that it would still be there half a millennium later, carrying their name forward through time. The wall is full of those names, bricks stacked on bricks, each one carrying its quiet record, millions of them, and beneath the bricks, the rice-lime mortar holding them together still. And beneath that, perhaps, an older rammed earth core laid down by people who have no names recorded anywhere. All of it stacked together, all of it held. Let your breath come slowly, in and out. The weight of the wall, all that stone and earth and brick and history, is somewhere far away, resting quietly on its mountain ridges, holding its names in the dark. You don't have to hold any of it, just let it rest. Let it all rest. The people who built the wall have been gone for centuries. Their labor remains. Their names, some of them, remain. And the wall they made, patient and old and full of layers, is still standing in the northern mountains, carrying everything forward into another quiet night. Sleep now, if you're ready. There is more to discover in the next act, but it can wait. Everything can wait. For now, just rest. Act 4. How the machine worked. Come back slowly, there's no hurry at all. Let your body settle a little deeper. Let your breathing find its own rhythm. In and out. The night is quiet. You are safe. You have nowhere to be and nothing to do but listen. In the acts before this one, we have seen the Great Wall as a physical thing, its landscape, its length, its many materials, the hands that shaped it, the lives it cost. We have traced its history from the rival kingdoms building earthen fences against each other, all the way to the last dynasty that let it fall quiet. But there is a question we haven't really asked yet, a practical, almost mechanical question. How did it actually work? Not as a symbol, not as an idea, but as a functioning system, as a machine built from stone and smoke and fire and human organization, designed to control an enormous frontier. How did you actually run a structure that stretched for thousands of kilometers across some of the most demanding terrain on Earth? That is what we're going to explore now, slowly, quietly, with the same gentle attention we've brought to everything else. The wall was long, but the wall was not just a wall. Woven into its length at carefully chosen intervals were the great fortified passes, the gateways, through which everything had to flow. Think of them as the hinges of the whole system. The wall itself was the lock, the passes were the keys. Two of the most famous are Jiayuguan and Juyongguan. Jiayuguan sits at the western end of the Ming Wall, at the edge of the Gobi Desert in what is now Gansu Province, a place where the mountains pinch close together and the desert begins in earnest, just beyond the gate. Its name translates roughly as the impregnable pass under heaven. That is not modesty. The fort there is remarkable, a multi-layered complex of walls within walls, with gates opening in multiple directions, designed so that any attacker who breached the outer gate would find themselves trapped in an enclosed killing ground with no clear way forward and no easy retreat. Juyongguan sits closer to Beijing in a narrow valley through the mountains north of the capital. It was one of the most strategically vital passes in the entire wall system, the closest major gateway to the imperial city. The valley it guards is steeply sided and barely wide enough for a road. Control Juyongguan, and you control the approach to Beijing from the north. At these great passes, the wall's function becomes unmistakably clear. These were not just military checkpoints. They were, in a very real sense, border crossings, administrative centers. Every person who wanted to pass through had to pass through here. Every merchant with a caravan, every diplomat with a message, every traveler going in either direction, and every one of them could be stopped, questioned, taxed, turned back, or waved through. The pass controlled the flow of everything: people, goods, animals, information. It was a choke point by design, a place where the enormous, uncontrollable movement of the world could be slowed to a single file and managed. Stand at the gate at Jiayuguan in your mind for a moment. The desert stretching away to the west, the mountains closing in on either side, the heavy wooden doors, iron-studded, the soldiers on the gatehouse above, the merchants waiting with their laden camels, the dust of weeks of travel on their clothes, the gate deciding yes or no. This leads us to something important, something that tends to surprise people when they first encounter it. The Great Wall was never purely a military structure. From very early in its history, it served a whole range of functions that had little to do with keeping armies out. Consider trade. The Silk Road, that ancient network of routes connecting China to Central Asia, Persia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe, passed through the wall. Merchants traveling eastward with their goods had to come through the gates, and at the gates there were customs officials. Tariffs were levied, records were kept. The wall was, among other things, a tax collection system operating at the edge of the empire. The wall also regulated immigration, or its ancient equivalent. People wanted to cross in both directions. Chinese subjects sometimes wanted to leave, and the authorities didn't always welcome that. Nomadic peoples from beyond the wall sometimes wanted to come in to trade, to settle, to seek opportunities in the empire's richer southern lands. The gates decided who could and on what terms. This was not so different from how a modern border operates. And then there is perhaps the most unexpected function of all, the wall as a road. The top surface of the Ming Wall, especially in the well-built mountain sections, is broad and flat and remarkably smooth, and it runs in a continuous line across terrain that would otherwise be nearly impassable. No river crossings, no muddy valley floors, no forest to push through, just a paved road running along the ridgeline above the worst of the weather and the worst of the terrain. Troops could be moved along it quickly, supplies could be transported, messages could travel on horseback far faster than they could through the mountain valleys below. The wall was its own highway, elevated, controlled, connecting the garrison towns and the supply depots and the command centers that kept the frontier functioning. Military deterrent, customs post, immigration control, transport corridor. The wall was all of these things at once, and the genius of it was that they all reinforced each other. You couldn't sneak goods past without going through the gate. You couldn't avoid the gate without climbing a mountain or crossing a river. The wall didn't just defend the empire, it organized it. But a wall, even a brilliant and multifunctional one, has a fundamental problem if it runs for thousands of kilometers. You can only see so far from any given point on it. And what good is a border if you can't know quickly when it's being crossed? The answer was the watchtower network. And it was, by any measure, one of the most impressive early warning systems the ancient world ever produced. Along the length of the wall, and at intervals beyond it pushed further out into the frontier zone to give even earlier warning, there were up to 25,000 watchtowers. 25,000. Each one manned by a small garrison, each one in line of sight, with the towers on either side of it. Think about what that means in practical terms. From any given tower, a soldier could see two adjacent towers, one to his left, one to his right. If he could see those towers, and they could see their neighbors and so on, then a single message could travel the entire length of the frontier in a matter of hours, not days, hours. Faster than any horse could gallop that distance, faster than any messenger could ride. The towers were spaced carefully enough that even in poor visibility, haze, dust, light rain, the signal from one could still be read by its neighbors. They were built tall enough to see over the terrain on high points wherever possible, so that each one commanded the widest possible view of the land below. And in those towers around the clock, in all weathers, through the long cold northern winters and the blazing summers, soldiers watched. They watched the empty steppe. They watched the valleys. They watched for the dust clouds raised by approaching horses. They watched for movement where there should be none. Most days nothing happened. Most days the view from the tower was just the same landscape it always was. Grass, rock, sky. But the watching continued regardless. It had to, because on the day something did happen, the speed of the response depended entirely on the vigilance of every soldier in every tower along the line. And when something was spotted, when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, when the scouts came running back to the tower, the signal had to carry not just the fact of a threat, but information about it. How many? How serious? What kind of force? The beacon system had a solution for this too, an elegant coded language of smoke and fire. By day, it was smoke. Soldiers would burn materials that produced thick, visible columns. Wolf dung was the traditional fuel, though other materials were also used. The number of separate smoke columns told the receiving tower how large the threat was. One column of smoke might mean a small raiding party. 2 meant something more serious. 3 meant a major force. The codes varied by dynasty and region, but the principle was consistent. The signal carried meaning, not just presence. By night, when smoke was invisible against the dark sky, the system switched to fire. Torches, braziers, signal fires, their number conveying the same coded information that the smoke columns carried in the day. This combination, smoke by day, fire by night, meant the system could operate continuously, without interruption, across all hours. There was no dead time, no window when the frontier was unseen or unmonitored. The signal chain was always live, always ready to carry its message from the edge of the known world to the command centers of the empire. Historical records from the Han dynasty describe warning signals reaching the capital within hours of a border incursion. The same principle, refined and extended, served the Ming Wall centuries later. In an age before telegraph, before radio, before any electronic communication at all, this was as fast as information could travel. And it was fast enough. Picture it. In the deep night, a lone tower on a mountain ridge, a small fire burning at its top. The next tower miles away sees the light and adds its own, and the next. A chain of fire spreading down the mountain spine, each flame answering the one before it, carrying its urgent message toward Beijing at the speed of sight. So the signals could travel the length of the wall, but once the message arrived, once the commanders knew there was a threat, and where, the wall had to actually function as a military platform. Troops had to move, supplies had to reach the right points, the response had to be fast. And this is where the physical design of the wall itself becomes fascinating. The top surface of a typical Ming wall section is 4 to 5 meters wide. That sounds like a specific, almost arbitrary measurement until you start to think about what it needed to accommodate. 4 to 5 meters is wide enough for soldiers to march in formation, 2 or 3 abreast, moving quickly, their equipment clanking, their boots on the flat paved surface of the walkway. Wide enough for horses to be ridden or led along it carrying officers or messages or light supplies. Wide enough in the broader sections near the passes, even for small carts, supply wagons moving along the top of the wall, restocking garrisons without having to descend to the valley floor and climb back up. This is a highway, not a symbolic highway, but a real, functioning one, elevated above the surrounding terrain, paved, relatively smooth, continuous. In the mountains of northern China, where the valleys could be choked with forest and river and mud, the top of the wall was often simply the best road available. And the wall ran continuously between the fortified passes and garrison towns, which meant that troops stationed at one section could, in theory, be concentrated rapidly at any threatened point, without ever having to leave the wall, move along the top, reach the crisis point, descend. The speed advantage this gave to defenders over attackers who had to approach over rough open terrain was enormous. But there is one final detail about the wall's design that speaks most directly to the sophistication of the people who built it. A detail that reveals how carefully they had thought through not just the obvious scenarios, but the difficult ones. On many sections of the Ming Wall, there are parapets on both sides of the walkway. Not just the outer face, the side facing away from China toward the steppe, but the inner face as well. Both sides protected by a raised battlement. Think about why that would be necessary. If the wall's purpose was simply to keep enemies out, you would only need the outer parapet. The defenders stand on the walkway, look out over the outer parapet, and fire down on anyone approaching from the north. Simple. But what if the enemy gets through? What if a section of the wall is breached or a gate is taken, and now there are enemy soldiers on the wall itself, moving along the walkway toward your position? Now, the outer parapet is useless. It's behind you. You need the inner parapet. Or consider this. The wall ran along ridgelines, which meant it was elevated above valleys on both sides. A threat could potentially come from below on the Chinese side too. Not an enemy breaking through, but a domestic uprising, a rebel force moving through the interior. The inner parapet meant defenders could face inward just as effectively as outward. Some sections went further still, adding low barriers across the width of the walkway at intervals, obstacles designed to slow an enemy who had gained the top of the wall and was trying to run along it, to break their momentum, to give defenders time to fall back and regroup at the next strong point. Every detail considered, every scenario planned for. The wall was not built by people who thought only about the obvious attack. It was built by people who thought about what happened when things went wrong, and designed the system to keep working even then. Let all of that settle now. The great gates with their iron-studded doors, the 25,000 towers linked by lines of smoke and fire, the 4-meter-wide highway running along the mountain spine, carrying soldiers and horses and small carts from garrison to garrison in the cold northern night. The parapets on both sides ready for whatever came. It was a machine, an enormous, ancient, human machine, made of earth and stone and rice-lime mortar, and the coordinated effort of hundreds of thousands of people across centuries. And for a long time, it worked. There is something quietly wonderful about that, about the ingenuity of it, the way that people, given an enormous problem and limited tools, found ways to solve it that still impress us 1,000 years later. Let your breath slow now. The wall is dark and quiet in the night. The towers are empty. The signal fires are cold. The gates are still. The mountain wind moves over the stone parapets the same way it has moved over them for 500 years. The same way it will move over them long after any of us are gone. There is one more act after this one more quiet hour of facts and history and gentle imagery waiting for you whenever you're ready. But if sleep is coming now, if the darkness is deepening and your thoughts are softening and the wall is becoming just a shape at the edge of your mind, then let it come. Let it come. You've done enough. Rest now. Act 5. Meaning, myths, visitors, and what happens next. Here we are, the last act. If you have been with us since the beginning, you have come a long way. You were there when we first unraveled what the wall really is, not one line, but a system, breathing with the landscape. You were there for the 2,500 years of building, the rival kingdoms, the first emperor, the Ming bricklayers pressing their names into wet clay. You sat with the human cost, 1,000,000 lives, the legend of Meng Jiangnu, the rice-lime mortar that outlasted everything. You walked the top of the wall in Act 4, 4 meters wide and elevated above the world, and watched the signal fires travel from tower to tower through the mountain night. Now, in this final act, we are going to step back, not in time, but in distance. We are going to look at the wall from the outside, at how the world has seen it, imagined it, misunderstood it, visited it, harmed it, preserved it, and continued to discover it. Settle in. Breathe slowly. Let this last act carry you the rest of the way. The Chinese literary tradition is one of the oldest and richest in the world, and the wall has been part of it for almost as long as the wall has existed. Poets of the Tang dynasty, writing roughly 1400 years ago in what many consider the golden age of Chinese verse, returned again and again to the wall as a setting and a symbol. Not as a thing to be celebrated particularly, not as a monument to power or ingenuity, but as a place of feeling. The wall in Chinese poetry is almost always a place of separation. A soldier posted to the frontier, far from his family, watching the seasons change on the northern steppe and wondering if he will ever see his home again. A wife in the south looking northward toward the mountains, waiting for a husband who has not returned. A traveler passing through one of the great gates, aware that the world on the other side of that threshold is different from the world they are leaving behind. The wall in these poems is not triumphant. It is melancholy. It is the edge of the known world, and standing at an edge always involves a reckoning with what lies beyond it and what you are leaving behind. Painters too return to the wall across the centuries. Landscape paintings of the Ming and Qing periods often place the wall in the far distance, a grey line threading across a mountain range, almost lost in the mist, dwarfed by the vast and indifferent sky above it. The human achievement, made small by the scale of the world it tried to hold. There is something honest about that tradition. The wall was immense, it was costly, it was in many ways extraordinary, and the poets and painters who lived with it and knew it best chose not to celebrate its grandeur, but to sit with its loneliness, with what it felt like to be a person standing beside something so much larger than yourself at the edge of everything familiar. Now, a myth that needs gentle putting to rest. You may have heard at some point in your life that the Great Wall of China is the only human-made structure visible from space with the naked eye. It is one of those facts that travels easily, the kind of thing that gets mentioned in school classrooms and pub quizzes and travel guides, passed along with confidence because it sounds plausible and impressive and memorable. It isn't true. The wall is extraordinarily long, yes, but it is not wide. At 4 or 5 meters across the top, it is roughly the width of a residential street, and the color of the wall grey stone, grey brick, blending into the grey-brown landscape of northern China, gives it very little visual contrast against its surroundings. The human eye at orbital altitude cannot resolve an object that narrow. Astronauts in low Earth orbit have reported being unable to see it even when they knew exactly where to look. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei, who became the first Chinese person in space in 2003, specifically reported that he had looked for the wall and could not find it. Other human-made structures, wide highways, large airports, vast reservoirs, are more visible from space than the wall, simply because they are broader and offer more visual contrast. The wall's fame and the wall's visibility are two very different things. There is something rather freeing about this, actually. The wall is already astonishing. It doesn't need the embellishment, it doesn't need to be visible from the moon to be one of the most remarkable things that human beings have ever made. The truth of what it is, what we have spent these 5 acts exploring together, is more than enough. The world has recognized what the wall is in its own institutional ways. In 1987, UNESCO designated the Great Wall a World Heritage Site, formally acknowledging it as a place of outstanding universal value, belonging not just to China, but to the whole of human history. The designation brought increased attention and eventually increased funding for preservation and study. Then, in 2007, something rather different happened. The new 7 Wonders of the World was a global public vote. Hundreds of millions of people around the world casting ballots online and by phone to choose which 7 structures they considered most worthy of the title. The Great Wall was among the winners, joining the Colosseum, the Taj Mahal, Machu Picchu, and 3 others. The vote was not a scientific survey, it was a popularity contest really, shaped by internet access and national enthusiasm and the particular energies of online campaigning. But in its way, it captured something true. The wall sits in the imagination of the world in a way that very few human constructions do. People who have never been to China, who have never seen the wall in person, carry some image of it, some sense of it. A grey stone rampart on a mountain ridge, impossibly long, impossibly old. 2 recognitions from 2 very different kinds of authority, one institutional and considered, one democratic and impulsive, but both saying the same thing. This matters. This is worth remembering. And people come in their millions to see it. Badeling is the most visited section of the wall, the most visited by a considerable margin of any section anywhere. More than 63 million visitors pass through it each year. 63 million, that is more people than live in the entire country of France, climbing a mountain wall north of Beijing every single year. Badeling is close to Beijing, easily accessible by road and rail, and heavily developed for tourism, with cable cars and shops and restaurants and smooth, rebuilt walkways and guardrails on the steeper sections. On a busy weekend, it can feel less like standing in a place of ancient stillness and more like joining a very slow-moving river of people in matching tour group hats. It is, in its way, remarkable, not for what it shows you of the wall, but for what it shows you of human fascination with it. Far away, at the opposite end of the Great Ming Wall, is a section of entirely different character, Shanhaiguan, The pass between the mountains and the sea is where the eastern end of the Ming Wall meets the waters of Bohai Bay. The wall does not stop at the shore, it continues into the water, the old stone emerging from the sea at low tide, a final stubborn declaration of the line it has been drawing since Jiayuguan, 3,000 kilometers to the west. There is only one place where the Ming Wall meets the sea, only one point where that extraordinary long line finally runs out of land. Shanhaiguan is that place, and standing there, with the water on one side and the mountains on the other, and the ancient stones disappearing into the waves, is to feel the wall's full length in a way that no map or statistic can convey. For those who want to find the wall at something closer to its own pace, quieter, steeper, more demanding, there are other options. Simitai and Jinshanling are adjacent sections northeast of Beijing, and they represent a different encounter with the wall entirely. Here, the restoration has been careful rather than comprehensive. The original Ming brickwork survives in much of its ancient state, worn, uneven, patched in places by centuries of amateur repair and natural weathering. The staircases cut into the walkway are steep, sometimes shockingly so, rising at angles that force you to use your hands as much as your feet. Hikers come here to experience the wall as something physical and demanding, to feel the altitude in their lungs and the age in the stones underfoot, and the wind coming off the northern hills without any guardrail to hold on to. At Jinshanling especially, you can walk for hours without seeing a souvenir shop or a cable car station, just the wall and the mountains and the sky. These sections draw a different kind of visitor. Not the mass tourism of Badaling, but people who want to work for their encounter with it, to earn the view from the ridgeline, to sit on a crumbling watchtower and look north, the same direction that soldiers looked from the same spot 500 years ago, and let the scale of it settle in through the feet and the hands as well as the eyes. The word restoration covers a wide range of things, and not everyone agrees on where the line should be drawn. Badaling was restored heavily and early, beginning in the 1950s, rebuilt to a condition that in many places looks almost new. The stone is clean, the steps are even, the walls are solid. Critics argue that sections like this have been so thoroughly rebuilt that they are no longer really the ancient wall at all, but a modern interpretation of it. Supporters point out that without that work, there would be nothing left to visit, that preservation requires intervention, and intervention inevitably changes what it preserves. At the other extreme is Jiangku, a wild, unrestored section in the mountains west of Beijing. Jiangkou is known for its dramatic views and its dramatic danger. The wall here has been left almost entirely to the elements, and the elements have not been kind. Sections of the walkway have collapsed. Towers are partially fallen. The staircases are slick with moss and broken by missing stones. There are no guardrails. There are no visitor facilities. There are signs warning that entry is at your own risk. And yet photographers and serious hikers seek it out specifically because of its wildness, because here, more than almost anywhere else, you can see what the wall looks like when time has its way with it. When the trees push their roots between the stones and slowly lever them apart. when the mountain winters crack the mortar, when the moss softens everything to grey-green, and the towers dissolve slowly back into the ridgeline from which they were once raised. Jiangku is the wall becoming gradually and without apology part of the mountain again. There is something deeply peaceful about that, and something a little heartbreaking too. People run on the wall. This is perhaps the most unexpected fact in our journey, and we will let it land gently. Organized marathons and ultra-running events have taken place on the Great Wall. Competitors run along sections of the walkway, up and down the steep staircases. Some sections have thousands of steps in a single stretch, rising and falling with the mountain ridge like the spine of some enormous sleeping creature. The races are short by distance standards. The terrain is too extreme for truly long routes, but they are among the most physically demanding foot races on Earth. There is something almost surreal about the image. The ancient military highway, built to move armies and signal fires across a frontier, now hosting people in running shoes and hydration vests, pushing their bodies up staircases cut from 500-year-old stone. The wall has been many things across its long life: a border, a road, a symbol, a tourist destination. Now, in places, it is also a race course. History, it turns out, is endlessly flexible. The wall accommodates all of it. But the wall is also quietly and persistently disappearing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the erosion is real and it is continuous. Weather is the oldest enemy. Freeze-thaw cycles crack the mortar in winter. Rain washes away the rammed earth sections in the west, the ones that have survived 2,000 years in the desert, but would not last long in a wetter climate. Wind carries the surface of the stone away, grain by grain, year by year. Then there are the plants. Trees growing near the wall send their roots under the foundations, down through cracks in the masonry, slowly and patiently levering the stones apart. Moss and lichen colonize the surface, holding moisture against the stone, accelerating the freeze-thaw damage, softening the sharp edges of what was once precisely cut and fitted. And then there are the people. Tourism at the popular sections has caused measurable physical damage. The constant foot traffic wearing down the walkway surfaces, the hands of millions of visitors smoothing the stone of the parapets. At Badaling, the most visited sections have had to be resurfaced multiple times. But the more poignant erosion is quieter than that. For centuries, particularly after the wall lost its military function and the garrisons withdrew, the local people who lived near it treated it as what it practically was: a very large supply of pre-cut, pre-fired, high-quality building material just sitting there. Farmhouses built from Ming bricks, animal pens enclosed by sections of wall, village roads paved with stones prized from the walkway. It was not vandalism, really. It was practicality. These were people with limited resources, and the wall was offering them something useful. The emperors were gone. The armies were gone. The wall was just stone. Much of what has been lost this way is gone permanently. The bricks are in the farmhouses now, plastered over and painted, carrying the old accountability stamps of their kilns inside the walls of people's homes, invisible and unknown. And yet, after all of that, After 2,000 years of weathering and raiding and rebuilding and abandonment and tourism and slow dismantling, the wall is still surprising us. Archaeological surveys using modern technology, satellite imaging, drone photography, ground-penetrating radar have in recent years been finding sections of the wall that were previously unmapped, stretches of frontier construction that had been missed in earlier surveys or had been buried by vegetation and soil accumulation, or had simply been in areas too remote to reach on foot. Each new discovery adds to the total picture. The 21,000 kilometers we began this journey with, that number itself is the result of a comprehensive survey completed in 2012, which found significantly more wall than previous estimates had suggested. And researchers believe there may be more still, waiting in the landscape to be found. The network was larger than we knew, more extensive, more complex, more present across the northern landscape than even the people who spent careers studying it had imagined. 2,000 years old and still revealing itself, still offering new information, new sections, new surprises. The long wall, patient and enormous, still keeping some of its secrets. There is something profoundly comforting about that, if you let yourself sit with it. The idea that the world still holds things undiscovered, that even the things we have known about for centuries can turn out to be larger and stranger and more extraordinary than we had realized. That history is not a closed book. And so we come to the end. We began with a single question. What is the Great Wall of China, really? And we have spent this long, quiet journey answering it, not with a single fact, but with many, with layers. The way the wall itself is made of layers. We saw it as a system rather than a line, as 2,500 years of building and rebuilding, as rammed earth and rice mortar and named bricks and signal fires, as a million lives and a legend of grief, as a highway and a border and a tax post and a beacon chain, as a poem about loneliness, as a myth that isn't true and a wonder that is, as 63 million visitors and one unrestored mountain and a farmhouse built from ancient brick. And as something still being found, still revealing itself to people patient enough to look. That is the Great Wall, Changcheng, the Long Wall, all of that at once and more than any of those things separately. Let it rest in your mind now, quietly, like the wall rests on its mountain ridges in the dark. The signal, fires cold, the gates closed, the wind moving over the stone parapets as it has always moved, carrying nothing now except the sound of its own passing. The wall has been standing for a very long time, and it will stand for a long time yet. It does not need you to hold it up. It does not need you to keep watching. So let your eyes close if they haven't already. Let the images drift and soften. The grey stone on the mountain ridge, the desert reeds compacted into ancient ridges, the names pressed into brick. The fire on the distant tower, all of it dimming now, all of it quiet. Sleep well.